Hello, and welcome Rabbi Joshua Yuter. I'm going to just, if you don't mind, take a minute to read your short bio for the people, our audience out there, whoever is not yet familiar with you. So Rabbi Yuter was ordained in 2003 from Yeshiva University's Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary. He also holds a BA in Computer Science from Yeshiva University, an MA in Talmudic Studies from Yeshiva University, and a master's degree in Social Sciences from the University of Chicago. Rabbi Yuter is an alumnus of Yeshiva Har Zion. He has served as rabbi at Stanton St. Shul on New York's historic Lower East Side from 2008 to 2014 when he moved to Israel. He is currently a member of the Rabbinical Council of America and International Rabbinic Fellowship and Rabbis Without Borders Fellowship. Rabbi Yuter is an award-winning blogger and writes lectures on various issues pertaining to law, theology, and society through the unique perspective of a second-generation rabbi with diverse personal and professional experiences and interests. In 2012, Rabbi Yuter was acknowledged by the National Jewish Outreach Program as one of the top 10 Jewish influencers for creative and strategic use of social media to positively impact the Jewish community. In 2014, was named one of PC Magazine's top 100 people to follow, and 2018, Jewish Telegraphic Agency listed Rabbi Yuter as one of the top 50 Jews to follow on Twitter. He is also a guest blog for JDate and contributed to Jewish Values Online. And I'm a specific fan of your punnies that you post. Very clever, you're a very clever man. And I'm delighted to have you. I was really happy to discover that you are now doing a podcast on the Midrash. And I want to let's see if you'll infuse some Midrash in our Parshat discussion today. We're going to be talking by Vayetzei and focusing in on Yaakov's journey and what he had to go through when he left Be'er Sheva and he's on his way to Haran. And he's going to be in the house of Lavan and a lot of trials and tribulations. And I thought we can get a discussion going on that. And I'd like to open with your thoughts.
So first, thank you very much for having me. The specific question of Yaakov's struggles was something that I'd spoken about in my own podcast for this week on a Midrash from Midrash Rabbah, that specifically links to Yaakov by the dream that he had, with the latter making an analogy to that with the statement that we also find in the Gemara, a little bit more sharper, somewhat of a pun here, that scholars, Talmidei Chachamim, only become more sharp when they clash against each other. And in context, it usually means through the arguments that Torah scholars have, they become sharper. And the connection there has a bit of a pun with God being nitzav over Yaakov, where Yaakov, once he got to a certain point and he stood in that particular point, then God stood over him. And the Midrash juxtaposes those two teachings. And what I'm summarizing the thing, but where it kind of led me was that there are some times when the only way that, or at least you can really appreciate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or really see God standing over you or near you, is after you've gone through some sort of challenge or a sharpening process, which at the time can feel very harsh. But on the other hand, it's very hard to grow unless you're faced with some type of struggle to push back against that will enable you to develop and really challenge yourself. And especially for someone like Yaakov, who started off as an Ish Tam Yoshevo Halim, someone you could translate as very simple and stayed at home, to transform from that type of person into a leader takes a lot more work and a lot more effort than other people with other dispositions might have to go through.
Right. I really like that, because I feel that, it's my philosophy and I had this putting together, trying to understand everything that Yaakov went through. it appears to me that he had to go through a transition, something transformative, because in taking a blessing that was not intended for him, it was intended for Esav. It was intended for a person who had the personality of Esav, and Esav was extrovert. Esav was, out there and a hunter, and as you said, Yaakov was Yoshev Ba'ohalim. And so, in order to be the proper vessel and to be able to not just be able to receive the bracha, but able to take the next step in fathering the Jewish nation, he needed these attributes. And it's my philosophy originally that he was supposed to work with Esav. I think they both made choices that led to a situation that it became impossible for that to be the case. And since they didn't work together, now Yaakov has to be internet's unstable. Do you hear me? Am I still there? Hello? Hello? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
No, you're back. Yes.
Okay, sorry. So I think they should have worked together. Since they didn't, now Yaakov had to play both. He had to play both sides. And it's a challenge. And I think personally, I see the dream that he had in the beginning, with the malachim going up and down the ladder as, and the way you see malachim can be interpreted a lot of different ways, but there are different forces in our lives that come to us as malachim, and that since things weren't going the way that the initial intention could have been with the setup it was having that twin, now there was a changing of the guards. I mean, there's different people with different jobs, and now kind of God had to work with him, and there's, he needed different forces. Now he had to go live with Lavan in order to cultivate his personality to be more like Esav. And I think this is all part of what had to happen now because of the steps he took before. Not just the running away, but Vayetzei, I think, shows that he was running away from something, but he also had to Vayelech, like Avraham, in order to become the next of in the chain.
So I really like that idea, particularly about when it comes to leadership growth and development, so much is the ability and necessity to adapt to situations and circumstances, because nothing is going to go exactly the way you planned. And things that you think might be correct, even if you might have been technically, may still not go the way you planned. And for me, one of the most poignant moments in Yaakov's time with Lavan comes in Chaf Tet Chaf Vav, where after the deception is revealed, Lavan goes to Yaakov, Lo ya'aseh bimkomenu lateta tze'ira lifnei bechira. We don't do this thing in our place to give the young before the old, clearly giving like a nice little, shtach to, Yaakov is like, hey, you went and usurped your position. But I think, for me, the reason why that, really comes out in this particular context is you think about the adaptation you need as, to be a leader. Sometimes doing the right thing means you're still going to have to deal with negative consequences afterwards. So Yaakov might have done exactly the right thing as instructed by Rivka, but just because you do exactly what you're supposed to doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a cost down the line. Another example I would give for this is David HaMelech, who on one hand had to fight all these wars, on the other hand wasn't able to build the Beis HaMikdash. So would you say, oh, he shouldn't have fought those wars? No, you're supposed to do what God tells you to do. But at the same time, doing what you need to do sometimes mean the world isn't going to work out the way you want it to. And that, I think, is a very underappreciated element of leadership that you really only get through life experience and the adaptation of having to move things around when things don't go according to your plan or your vision exactly.
Yeah, although I do see a difference. Tell me, hear me out and tell me if you see this. Because with David Amalek, I feel he did have to fight those wars. I don't really see a way out of that. And he wasn't never said that he was going to be the builder of the Beit HaMikdash. It's still something he wanted to do. But in this scenario, I don't just see it, and I know that not everybody agrees with this, as Yaakov having listened to his mother and not having any culpability in this process, because I know that some people differentiate between the Bechor and the Bracha. But to me, I see them as part and parcel of one another. And that when nobody told him to put Esav in that predicament and to sell the rights of the Bechor to him. And then once he did that, in order, what does it mean? He needs the Bracha, he got the rights of the Bechor, and it necessitated the next step. So I feel like he instigated that, and that things didn't necessarily have to go this way. Perhaps when Esav came back, it was a moment. I mean, if you go by the interpretation that Avram had just passed, and Yaakov was making this soup, and Esav came back, Ayef, and he was, we know he did some horrible things, but it could have been out of mourning, devastation, trauma of the passing of his grandfather he was so close to. And maybe when he came back and he was saying, he was trying to elicit some sort of compassion perhaps from his brother. And maybe if that situation didn't go that way, maybe it didn't have to happen. So I do see it as there is a possibility of Yaakov having some form of responsibility in the chain of events that occurred. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree completely. And that's kind of, I think my point is, regardless of what the detail is, you could say he was right or wrong, but even if even if you're in a position where, you are compelled in some way to take a particular action, you're still going to be held responsible for the consequences of those actions. There is a category in halakha called an ones, which is a very exceptional case where you literally have no choice. But in the real world, leaderships can sometimes have, there's this idea of a Sophie's choice, where you're given the choice, take one kid or the other kid, you don't know what to do. And sometimes you could be faced with two bad options, or two options that might have, negative repercussions. One hand is to say, it's like, oh, you made the wrong decision, but it's possible that you have to face them even when you make the right decisions. And I think that's something that's very hard for a lot of people to grasp and appreciate, that, even if you want to say that Yaakov, has some ethical culpability, sure, absolutely. But I would say that would go both ways, because you would still have a culpability, even if it means you did the right thing for the right reasons, because a lot of leadership is contingent on the results of what happened with it. And part of leadership is also accepting all those consequences and living with them and dealing with them. And that's kind of what Yaakov had to do when he was with Lavan, which is really face up to, here's what I did, might have been right. It's going to make my life harder though, but that's the cost of doing what's right. And we talk a lot about sacrifice and how important sacrifice is, but part of sacrifice is you actually have to give something up. If there's no pain, or there's none of that challenge behind it, then it's not really a sacrifice. Then you're just doing your own thing. And we say in Pirkei Avot, Lufum Tzara Agra, that the reward is proportionate to the pain. And I think that that's a very key component that comes out here, that certainly in certain cases, that's kind of essential to get to where you need to be. It might be unpleasant, it's not going to feel good, and you might be very bitter with it at the end. But if you have goals and you need to reach a certain point, as the saying goes, the only way out is through. And it's a lesson that, is struggling for a lot of people today to do in different ways.
Right. I feel I wanted to discuss, because when we're talking about, now that we're talking about culpability and decisions that Yaakov made, and consequences that he has to endure because of it, I really wanted to take a look and ask your opinion on what you thought about, because the whole process, we know he seems very ethical in terms of how he tries to be crafty but ethical in how he deals. Oops, unstable again. I'm going to wait. Okay, can you hear me?
Back.
Okay.
Yes.
So in dealing with Lavan, he as he himself tells the story over later, how he was very careful when he took care of their sheep and in working for the daughters, and he tried to do everything so that he could not be accused of anything. And it sounds like he had the highest standard he held himself to. So of course I'm nitpicking. I know that, but again, he is a Yaakov, and they are judged k'chuta sara, like, because of who they are. And I say this again with reverence, but when he does leave the house of Lavan, I think the fact that God had told him to leave at that point, he noticed that Lavan's countenance was not towards him as it had been, and he heard the sons speaking and saying that he got rich off of us, and they were angry. But God told him, leave, and he said, I'll be with you. And at that point, we're told that Rachel stole the teraphim, and we're told that Yaakov stole the heart. I mean, I know it's a phrase that means that he did it without his knowledge, but I still can't get away from the fact that it uses that word that kind of calls out at us, and that if God said he's going to be with him in this journey, why the need to do it by running away, where now he's going to call himself into question? I think he has this constant fear from the beginning when we introduced him, and maybe to the end of his life, I don't know, of not confronting the issue head on, even if he does do the right thing. And I think when God says, I will be with you, that maybe he should have had, the ability to stand on his 2 feet, know that God is going to be with him, and not have that fear, know he's in the right because he made all the right decisions, because he had to have that confrontation anyways after, when Lavan chased him down. They had to have that conversation anyway. He wasn't going to get away with not having it. So why not do it on the outset, And I think that this is a big part of the problem that he struggles with, even way back I think maybe this is part of the struggle he has with the Sar Shel Esav, the Ish, later on also. I don't know, but I think that this is, do you get the same sense that he should have told Lavan, and that going without that was a problem?
So, we see a bit later, when he's about to reconfront Esav, when he's that insecure, where he says, "Katonti mikol hachasadim mikol hamet asher asita et avdechan," whole discussion about that, and with faith. And I know with the Gemara, there's some discussion about how much are you supposed to rely on God versus your own actions, and either ein somechin al haneis, or specifically, don't put yourself in such a position. So it's one thing to say God is with you, or believe God is with you, but also, are you taking necessary precautions? So on one hand, you could say yes, Yaakov should have been more upfront and confrontational and really stood up for himself. But that's always, a tricky thing with leadership as well. When are you supposed to go head on? When are you supposed to take another route? Because if the goal is what matters to get to a certain place, you always have to read the decision. You have to read the situation differently based on where you are, based on where the other person was. in this case, Yaakov isn't really on his home turf. So he's, this isn't really supposed to be. You could imagine, Lavan would have been more powerful in that specific area, in that community, doesn't really, with Yaakov not really being one of them, he might have thought that, like, yes, on one hand, God is with me. On the other hand, I now have a lot of possessions. I've got a large family. The first step is to try to get away, as opposed to being very like antagonistic to someone when you're at a clear disadvantage. So should he have stayed and fought? I mean, again, if God tells you to leave, like, okay, you go. But in terms of having faith that, no, I can stay and I can fight it out, that's not always a great strategy either. Could very well have been reckless. And it could have also been, as I said, if he was that, maybe insecure in terms of the katonti, where he just didn't think he might have had enough zechut to warrant what he might have considered an excess of divine protection that would have been required. Meaning he might have thought, okay, I'm going to flee and everything's going to be fine when I leave, but maybe not enough to survive one-on-one.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. I guess that's true. I it's hard. I don't know, because I with this, I think also that's was my feeling, and I don't know why. Like, I want to look at this, the aspect of, if we can go back, because I kind of jumped ahead, and in terms of Yaakov having to marry Leah and then getting Rachel. And I think, with the way I explained to you, that I felt that he had to take on this characteristics of Esav. And I think part and parcel the fact that, if you go by that, Leah was intended for Esav and Rachel was intended, for Yaakov, that once the situation became where already Esav kind of, I guess, went too far off the path to have, I mean, I don't know, I guess that's debatable whether if he married Leah, if she would have helped him. I don't know. And then, of course, you have later with Dinah, they say Dinah could have brought him back. Who knows? I don't know. But if Yaakov and Esav aren't that partnership, which I think then in my mind's eye went to the 12 Shvatim, that he needed Leah also to fill in that gap, to help him to cultivate that part, because she was a lot apparently like Esav in terms of that extroverted personality, and she was able to learn those traits from her father, but for the good. She went out and she made things happen, and I think she knew how to do those things and how to be a force to teach him, to guide him, or to be an Ezer Kenegdo, which Rachel couldn't have been, because Rachel was similar to him, at least I think, in the way that she seems more passive in the whole story. You see Leah making things happen, and you see Rachel kind of sitting back and I think more of waiting, because and if you look at all of the narrative and how it tells you what happens with the children, specifically the words it uses in the naming of the children and the activity done, she does seem more passive. So I think that it was part of the also plan B, the way things had to go. And I just want to know if you see it that way, or if you see it as something that, I don't know, something else, something other. Then I'm curious to hear how you understand this Yaakov having to marry both Rachel and Leah. How you see this?
So, we don't, the way that I see it is, there wasn't a whole lot that, we really see necessarily from their personalities. One thing that does stick out to me is that we actually see a fair measure of growth on the part of Leah, where after, for her first three kids, the way that she names them are, very depressing, and takes it very internally, like first calls it Ruvain because God sees that God sees my my pain, and now my husband's going to love me. And then Shimon's like, oh, God sees that I'm still hated. And for Levi's like, oh, it's like it's only until you get to Yehuda where she's finally thankful of Odet Hashem, like I'm going to give thanks to God now. And it takes a lot of I guess work and effort to get out of that that sense of self-pity, I guess, and to sort of change your mindset in terms of where you are and how things are going in your life for that sense of gratitude. Whereas, Rachel, you see it, I mean, it's hard, to compare like one with the other, given, how they, came out, so to say, well, I know that people like comparing Rachel and Leah in terms of one being better versus one not. So without in any way casting aspersions on Rachel, there is some degree of growth that we do see with Leah that I think is certainly needed, and perhaps something that Yaakov might have needed to see himself, because let's not forget, at the very end of his life, when he tries summarizing it to Paro, it was, my days were, short, not that great. I didn't live as long as my, parents. So, his life wasn't that easy. And, there was some element in his life of someone, who accepted and embraced their life situation that, again, it's not so easy for a person to do. It's even harder if you don't have any role model like that in your life to say, okay, here may be a way of doing it where you can acknowledge that things are, you can acknowledge a rough patch while also trying to see at some point, okay, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, or yes, it's a rough patch, but what can I do with this and what can I make with this in order to grow and advance?
Hmm. Right. It's interesting how he answers Paro, and it really makes me think about when you started discussing his perception of events, and the fact that I think you feel a lot of fear in his life. And I mean, you can take it with everything, with the whole incident of Shechem, and like I just said, with him being afraid of leaving Lavan, him being so afraid of encountering Esav. I mean, none of these are small things. These are huge things. I'm not saying that they're small things and they that anyone would feel any differently, but it's just that I always wonder, when people have such fear, if they don't end up with some measure of self-fulfilling prophecies in a certain way. And if they don't end up causing a lot of, unfortunate events, that if you weren't living in fear, or if you had a better outlook, that might not have played out the way it did. And so, I like to look at things and try and analyze it in that way, because I feel like it helps us have a healthier perspective and way of looking at things, just so that we can be more, we can have more of a, I hate to say control over events, but a healthier outlook that will yield healthier results. So I very much wonder about that of Yaakov, and I think that it might be reflective in the fact that he is the only Av who, when he got his name changed from Yaakov, which is, the one that's lower into Yisrael, which is more of, on a higher, got past that and more redemptive, as opposed to this Yaakov, which seems the opposite, is that when you see him bounce back with the names in the narrative, and because I feel that maybe he didn't stay on that level where his outlook was not, it was more of less of things are happening to me, or I can control events. I feel like Yashar El Yisrael, to be, to battle with difficult situation and to come out successful. I think that there's a reason why he goes between both names, because he doesn't stay there. And is that something that we're still going through? Something that we never overcame as a nation. What do you think?
That's an excellent question. It's something I'd have to think about. I've definitely seen ideas about how people bring stuff into their lives, and as you mentioned, the self-fulfilling prophecy of like the way you think things are going to go, and or and that's just the way things are going to come out. Whether or not that's fully with Yaakov and that's how things are, it's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of it. I really would like to think about that a little bit more. I can say that in the moment, it's often very hard to know what is it that you should be doing. Just to give two examples, one example of two different options. If someone is facing struggles in their life, a challenge, one way of looking at it is God is telling you, hey, here's a challenge and I want you to persevere and double down. Or God is telling you, I'm putting up this wall for a reason, you should change what you're doing. And this is same situation. You've got both options are attested, suffering in terms of punishment, suffering in terms of a challenge. Which way should you go? Yeah, in that very moment where you have to make these decisions, it can be very challenging to know what the best way is. And being paralyzed with fear can obviously come up a great deal, and can certainly affect of what happens, like what are the negative consequences, and then you start thinking about, well, what if I did this and what if I did that, as opposed to being able to learn and say, well, I didn't do this, so now here's where I'm going to go forward. I think that that's one area where having a difference of attitude could certainly help. If you view struggles in the past not just as opportunities but as learning, opportunities to learn and to grow from, as opposed to, these things were terrible. I think that's one place where attitude can certainly come in difference, not so much in terms of being passive or active, but how much are you willing to learn from your past to apply differently, as opposed to keep repeating the same patterns that don't get you anywhere.
Right. Right. Um, it makes me think about if you go to Vayeshev, and where they criticized him, they said that Yaakov wanted to sit b'sheket b'shalva. He wanted to just kind of hang up his hat. I had my difficult years. He seemed to want to just pass the mantle on to Yosef. We say then Ela toldot Yaakov Yosef, and you see so much. It starts. I think the first step that I noticed was in our parsha was he doesn't want to, or I don't know if want is the right word. He doesn't feel the necessity or the urgency to leave Laban until Yosef is born. So already you feel the sense that Yosef is special. Of course, we know he's the son of Rachel and he loves Rachel. And once he's born, it says he wants to hightail it out of Laban's house, because now he's really concerned. And I think he does put all of his stock in his future in Yosef. And it makes me think, because a lot of times I see stories of people I know also, that when the parents get of certain age, they're like, okay, now it's time for my kids to take over, and I've done my thing. But that in life, that unfortunately, I don't think you've ever done your thing until your last breath. I think that a job is a person. Each person has their own pathway, that nobody, no matter who it is, can take over somebody can be the next link in the generation and do their own thing, but we all have our own jobs, and there's never, I don't even know what sitting in Sheket B'Shalva, I don't really know what that technically means. I feel that Yaakov was always in pursuit of shalom, as we see in our parsha, when he makes this neder with God, he asks if he can return to his father Bishalom. And at first glance, I think it seems just because Esav wants to kill him and he's worried, and now Laban was running after him, and he had all these things in his life, but I think that he really just wanted peace. He just wanted peace, and I'm guessing that it's hard for me because I see that there's something wrong with that in the text, and I don't know if there's something wrong with the desire. No, I don't believe so, but something wrong with in the activity that you take, kind of not just wanting it, but hoping it happen, which is the opposite of what I just said to you, because I said that the way you perceive things is the way that it would happen. But I really don't think it is opposite of what I said, because I think it's something he wanted but didn't believe would happen. Because it's not just the desire for something, but the pursuit of it and what you really believe will happen.
So I think you just made some great points there. What sort of triggered in my own head with this was you made the observation of Yaakov, like, letting things come to him and not being as proactive. That fits, very well with, in Ishtav Yoshev Halim, that, if you're the type of person who you just want to be left alone and live your life, which, a lot of people want to do, they don't want stress, they don't want drama, just, give me my own vine and fig tree. I'll stay there and it'll be fine. I'll go do my thing. I want a drama-free life in my own house. And that's very attractive to a lot of people. And, for some people it's like, I can't live like that. It's completely boring. But other people, crave that and want that stability for their personality and their disposition. So that's something which, if that's what you want, you will probably take a more passive view to things because you just don't want to get involved. It's also ambition that you're going to seek out and do, such that any disruption that comes up is a disruption from your life. If I can make an analogy, I'm thinking of like the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits, where the Hobbits never wanted to leave the Shire. Everything was nice and good. And then something comes along and upends the entire world. And, maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But, if you're just going to sit where you are, yeah, I mean, you can live an enjoyable life. You also might not do what you need to do or what the world needs you to do, in which case you still might do it, but your attitude is the world is now imposing on you of like, here's what I want, but here's what everything else is going. And it's really hard to, sort of have an ambition to like,
I hear you now.
Okay, not sure what came through.
You're talking about ambition. You said it's really hard, and that's where we got cut off. We're talking about
yeah, so it's really hard, if you don't, the point I was trying to make was, if the most ambition you have in your life is to be left alone, that's not really much of an ambition. And anything that goes on in the world is going to be seen as disruptive to what you really want. Whereas if you've got goals and you've got, here's what I'd like to achieve, you're actually going to have to, you'll not only put in effort, but you're going to see value in the effort, and it won't be seen as like all of, life is getting in the way of what I really want to do. So I think with all that together, based on your other comments, I think really does coalesce nicely with Yaakov's personality.
Right. I just want to comment on what you said, because to defend the people that want to sit in the tent as opposed to the people that have goals and ambitions, I think, each one has their own tests, because even somebody with goals and ambitions, when life throws at them something that doesn't align with their goals and their ambitions, they can get just as irritated as the one who's sitting in the tents gets thrown real life situations. So, because everyone is going to get thrown stuff that they didn't want or ask for, as hopefully God just sending you, you turn right there because you missed it and you didn't have whatever growth you were supposed to or accomplish whatever you were supposed to. And that, I really think that for me, it was always been the only healthy outlook is just to take everything as a necessity, as not, oh, this is thrown to me and it's annoying me because it's not what I need in my life, but it is what you need in your life in some capacity or another, or what somebody else needs in their life, and only you can handle, whatever it is. But in order to just really navigate through life successfully and to do things with the most peace of mind for you and for everyone else around you is just to take it as whatever it is a necessity. And if you're not enjoying it, just do it the best you can, the quickest you can, and move on. Because I've found that avoidance, and I think this goes with everything that I see in the story, avoidance only leads to another situation with a different face and difficult, that you're going to have to face one way or another, or your children will have to face if you don't. Things don't go away. I think that's the bottom line. And things get harder. They get harder if they're not, if you deal with it the first time it comes your way, it's less painful than it might be. That's just, I think, the way I see life. And I see a lot of the stories in the Torah, starting from all the way back from Adam, that's the way things unfold. What do you say?
I agree with that completely. There was a book that came out in the past couple of years called The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff, mispronouncing his name, Lukianoff, I think, and Jonathan Haidt, that kind of deals with that exact issue where by trying to protect kids excessively, they never learn how to cope with things on their own. So yeah, like you may save them a little bit of pain now, but they're just going to face that later on in life. And yes, it's uncomfortable watching, kids struggle, but unless people confront it and figure out and learn how to deal with struggle, they're never going to grow. They're always going to be stuck over here. And people give other analogies to certain insects where in order for them to grow, they have to shed their skin in order to come out, because yes, that's a skin or shell can be protective, but it can also be constricting, and it can prevent and inhibit growth. And yes, you don't necessarily have to fight every battle, but if you always run away from it and you never learn how to fight, then you'll never know. You'll never learn what it takes when a time comes when you'll need to fight. You will be unable to do so. And trying to find that balance of, again, picking your battles, but doing so in such a way that you can grow and you can develop and you can build off of that is something that is, very difficult for people to do. And yeah, it's, usually going to be easier in the short term. It's like, oh, I'm not, just to run away from it. But again, there too, you've got costs, and there's no escaping that pretty much everything in life is going to involve a trade-off of one kind or another.
Right. Right. I don't know if that's the good news or the bad news.
Well, I think it's an important part, of maturity and growth, and part of that whole leadership thing that Yaakov had to endure in terms of why do you have to go through struggles? It's because just even the realization that there are always trade-offs. And one way of looking at it is, no matter what I do, there's always a bad decision and there's always a loss. Another way of looking at it is, there are a whole bunch of different possibilities and you have the choice. And yes, you can't control everything, but you have a lot more control than you do. And if you can focus less on, here are the things that I missed out on, or I might have missed out on, because you never know the results of the actions you didn't take, only the results of the actions you did take. But maybe focus on, hey, I was in this situation, I made the best decision with the information I had available, and I tried this. Did it work out 100%? Almost nothing ever does, but you could appreciate all the things that did come up and what you did learn from it. So even with that tension of the struggle, once you accept it as a reality, then it may help not only lower the standards of expectations of what you think life ought to be, but it also may help you appreciate a little bit more all those other things that might have been very painful for you to go through in the moment. Which again, depending on who's ever listening, some people might have thought of something and, still can't wrestle with it. And it's, I don't want to imply that, every suffering can always line up equally with a piece of meaning, because that can also be a very dangerous way of looking at things too. Sometimes things are just terrible. But even when people go through terrible experiences, there's the saying that we don't control what happens in our lives. The best that we have is we can control how we react to them. And yes, it's hard. And yes, it can be painful. And yes, it takes a lot of growth to learn how to react to these things. But such is life. It's never linear. There are ups and there are downs. But if you have, a little bit of faith, in God, have a little bit of faith in your own koach to try to overcome, maybe at some point you will be able to see some light at the end of the tunnel and take whatever you've had, whatever struggles you might have, and maybe come out a little bit better than you were beforehand.
Right. Or at least be able to make, you see a lot of times crazy stories, painful stories, but a lot of times so many people, you can read the stories even of Holocaust survivors and who suffers more than a Holocaust survivor, and look at Viktor Frankl and what he did. And
Right.
I think about his book all the time. It made such an impact, I'm sure, on so many people's lives. And what he taught me about what goes on in your mind and the power of the mind. I mean, the mind must be, hopefully everyone should have a healthy one. It can be such a powerful thing. And I think about it all the time with my own life, that life is my perception of it, because you live in your mind more than anything else. And that if you can just have a way of getting in there that's healthy or beneficial, you can impact yourself, you can impact others in ways that are like beyond comprehension. And I see people also have all the blessings in the world, and what's going on in their mind is making them miserable. So like you said, it's not necessarily what you're given, but how you choose to integrate that. I love that. And I thank you so much. I know that I've taken a lot of your time. I really appreciate you joining me for this Parsha discussion and all your words of wisdom. I wish you much blessing and hatzlacha in all you do. And I hope you will join me again sometime in the near future.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this. And also, I agree. I look forward to maybe doing this again in the future sometime. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You all. Bye.
Bye.